Good morning. It's the 22nd of February. Welcome back to the Deep 404. Apologies. I have an update for you from Ukraine. For those of you following the channel, over the next couple of days, I may not be able to deliver the same length of content that I normally do. I have some other things going on around work and that sort of thing, but I will still work to get content out. Russia has suffered a couple of, quite tragic losses in the last few days. These losses are related to the use of cluster munitions, and a type of cluster munition which is aimed at soft skin targets, soft skin being lightly armoured vehicles, pickup trucks, that type of thing. Tents, temporary housing, and of course people. These type of munitions do an airburst, and I'm just going to go and show you a little bit of this. If you just give me a moment here. 1 second, caller. Right, we've done this. 1 second, and we'll get that coming. And I'll just show you this. These aren't what you would consider the cluster munitions used against heavy artillery or tanks and armoured vehicles. These are used primarily against people. I've just got a video here. I'm not going to show footage of the attacks. I'm just going to show you footage of the weapon and how it works, so you get an understanding of this. Let's just see where we are. Here we go. You'll see rock missile coming down, and you'll see the explosion there. The thing to notice about it is that it is an airburst explosion, and here you'll see the damage it does. So on those boards positioned near the explosion point, I'll just replay that. You can see here what is fired out of one of these warheads is something like 180,000 tungsten steel balls. And now this explains something about the footage. If you have been onto Telegram or perhaps Twitter or X to see some of the images or footage relating to these attacks on those Russian soldiers. What is interesting about these, if you read the comments on some of these postings, some people are suggesting, oh, this is obviously fake. These are staged. These pictures, look, all these guys are laying on the ground, but there's no visible damage to them. They're not blown apart. There's no massive crater in the ground, and that's because of the nature of the weapon that we're talking about here. I'm just going to go and grab another short thing for us to have a look at here, just so I get another look at this. Just after this footage here we go. So you see there that airburst and the way that it spreads out across the ground. So this is what's happening here. These type of weapons are being employed in these attacks. They're exploding above or to the side, but in an airburst manner upon these troops, firing out ball-bearing size pieces of metal at extremely high velocities. And so these pictures that you are seeing are of people who have been killed by this weapon in its use. And the reason that people are questioning it is because you're not getting up close pictures. A single ball bearing traveling and hitting someone, there's many ways in which that could kill. If there are tens, hundreds or thousands of them in the vicinity of where you are, then death and serious maiming by this weapon would be expected without the signs that you would normally expect to see if, for example, a high explosive burst or weapon had gone off near them with a fragmentation, pieces of shrapnel blowing out. So this is part of what has happened, and this has been something which has occurred a number of times throughout the conflict. There have been previous examples of this happening. There was about 2 weeks ago an example, sorry, not quite 2 weeks ago, an example reported of this to the west of Avdeyevka, where in this case Ukrainian troops who had been pulled out of Zaporozhia to be brought in to hold Avdeyevka as reserves. They were marshalling in an area, and reportedly a similar type of attack has occurred. There is reports that it was a combination of Iskander, heavy, high explosive missile strikes, and cluster type munitions. And so most likely those cluster type munitions were similar to the ones that were used here. The most recent attack was in Volnovakha in the Kherson region, so down in the southwestern area of Ukraine. There are reports that there were, in fact, in this strike in Volnovakha, 3 separate attacks. Now, these are what are called GMLRS. They're a guided multiple launch rocket system. These are a NATO weapon, and they use or rely upon GPS. So someone identifies, in this case on the Ukrainian side, they identify where Russian troops are amassing, probably using a reconnaissance drone. The drone's position is known. From that, they are able to calculate and estimate the position of the Russian troops, or via other means, depending on where they were. The Ukrainians may already have had this location locked into a map, in which case they are able to then request back to a MLRS team to fire one of these guided munitions, and they give them the location. And so these munitions are then fired. They target using GPS accurately and do that airburst explosion. So this, as I say, for Russia, after a week of massive success with the taking of Avdeyevka, a couple of examples, things to just remind everyone that while they, the overall position of the war may be moving in one direction, for the men on the ground, it is a fight every day, every hour, every minute, in some cases, to survive. And things like this occur in regions both to Ukrainian troops and to Russian troops. In this case, the Russian troops involved are the ones who have suffered due to these cluster munitions. I've had a couple of requests from people to use maps a little more, so I'm going to use a couple of maps just to talk through a little bit about what has been happening on the front line. So if you just give me a moment again, I'll try and get one of the maps here. Now, this is a deep state map, and this is a live UA map. You can access these yourself. They are very useful. These two are both, I would consider them pro-Ukrainian maps, but they both provide information useful for different reasons. The live UA map provides information on recent strikes, so you can start to get information about where in this case, where the Russians are attacking and looking to push forward to. The deep state map I find easier sometimes just to use for visualizing positions and where it is that troop movements are happening. So starting there a little bit here. We've been following for a long time around Kupiansk. This map makes it very clear to see where the Russian forces are in terms to Kupiansk, which is right here. I might just expand that a little bit for you. Kupiansk, a major crossroads here. Sinkovka, where there has been fighting for Sinkovka going for some time. You also get an indication on these maps of directions of current advances. So we see here and here indications. Now, these are pro-Ukrainian maps, so they often will lag a little behind what you might hear or see being reported in X or in Russian channels, and which is to be expected. Sometimes Russian forces will be reporting their advances from the ground to Telegram as soon as it's happening. That takes some time to filter through. Pro-Ukrainian maps, you would imagine, sometimes more thorough in checking what the Russian sources are saying to them, and so sometimes may lag a little bit. But all along here, this is an important area around around Kupiansk. For some time ago, some months ago, there were reports that there were evacuations from the townships around Kupiansk. While the front line is here, the Russian artillery has the ability to reach and touch these areas, and so moving people, civilians, out of those areas makes a lot of sense. There have been a number of Russian attacks on bridges along the Oskol River, which runs down through here. Those attacks were done south of Kupiansk, down this area here, for probably along a 15 or 20 kilometre length along here. And what this was then doing was forcing Ukrainian troops who were wishing to get across and resupply through a reduced number of access points, so just making that logistics harder for them. Now, if the Russians do reach Kupiansk, then they have the ability to roll down the Oskol River. They can start to push in, use the river as a bit of a natural barrier for them, their flank, and then look to take this entire green area to the right of the Oskol. So here's the Oskol here. All of this area between the front line and the Oskol, you could imagine would then become somewhat easier for the Russians to capture, because they're able to wrap around it and enclose that area. They already have this eastern line. If they take Kupiansk and make it to the Oskol, they're then able to stop this supply route. The bridges are taken out. They're able to stop the next supply route as they move down, just making it more and more difficult for these troops, Ukrainian troops in the middle here, to be resupplied, and they'll be coming under fire from multiple directions, effectively building what the Russians might call a moving cauldron, where they would slowly roll this the pincer on this western flank and this eastern flank down. As we move down, there is also activity. I might just jump across to the other map here. This is a live UA map, giving you an indication as we move down from Kupiansk, where we were just looking. Kupiansk here, the Oskol running down here. You can see Russian sites where Russians have been attacking, bombing attacks. You can see how they are already bombing the outskirts of Kupiansk. Strategic positions further down, no doubt taking out either ammunition dumps, observation posts, or roadways, or some key element here that the Russians have decided they would like to neutralise early before they advance further towards the Oskol. If we just move down, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. We move down a little bit here. We start to get to an interesting area. Now, the Krasny Liman area around here, we're getting reports of Russian advances. This is the Zebrets river here, this river that you can see through here. The Russians getting very close to it. Again, same principle applies. If they reach here, they're able to then roll up using this riverway as a bit of a natural barrier on their left flank as they move up, or the western flank as they move up. But if they do that, if they take this position here, then Ukraine runs into the trouble now, where they find themselves in a large salient in this area here. Now, this is probably 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 kilometres across. That's a significant area. But when you consider that average general Russian artillery's got a range of about 15 or 16 kilometres, then you can have artillery sitting back a few kilometres from the front line, able to reach into this area from all three sides, from this northern area, from this eastern area, and from this southern area. So concern is, and I'll just go back to the other map, we can have a look at this area here. Concern is then that Sloviansk becomes a target. After Seversk, if the Russians can push down from here and up this way. Now, at the moment, the Russians seem to be, this is Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar, seem to be focusing on pushing westwards from Bakhmut and taking Chasiv Yar. However, if they do look to apply forces here and move up this major roadway towards Slavyansk and start to push down here from the Krasny Liman area, then there is this opportunity to then create another large cauldron in this area and cut this area off and make a large gain. It doesn't look as though they are really initiating that move yet, but that's something which we might see coming in the next weeks or months as well. As we move down, Avdeyevka, the area here, in Avdeyevka, we have Avdeyevka itself, which has just been taken. We can see the red line now to the west of Avdeyevka. Lastochkino. This position here, reportedly Ukrainian forces have been putting up strong defences here, but the Russians are making a move in Lastochkino. Yesterday there was reporting that 60 FABs, Fab 500 bombs had been dropped on Lastochkino. That's the same sort of level of ordnance that was being dropped on areas of Avdeyevka during the assault on Avdeyevka. This area of Stepove here, you can see there's a grey area. I think this grey area really is probably closer to being Russian territory now. There are some reports that the Ukrainians may be starting to relinquish their defences Lastochkino and trying to keep Stepove, and instead looking to fall back to areas where they can better defend. So that might be falling back to Bodichi and Semenivka and Orlivka here and trying to hold the Russians, preparing some defences along this line here. I'll just zoom out a little bit there. As we move further down the line here, the Russians are advancing up along through Pervomaysk, along here to Kalivka, up along this major roadway. They are also then making moves up along this waterway and this line of towns here from Marinka. Pobjeda has just fallen to the Russians. So again, we can see the Russians now being able to move up this supply road, getting to Kurakhove, this area. Once they get here, they start to cut a supply road which runs down this way. Novomikailivka, there was some footage I showed from a couple of weeks ago where this was just being levelled. This township, while it's in the grey zone area now, Russian forces are getting in there. The Russians seem to have employed a tactic there of just levelling Novomikailivka, so there were no places left for the Ukrainians to hide and to fight from. So obviously the Russians will then look to move up along this river line and along the settlements along it. And once they reach this position here, Uspanivka, once we start to hear Uspanivka being approached and likely to be taken. I'm sorry if that's difficult to see for you. I'll just try. I might even try on the other map just for a moment. See if that gives us a better look. Just give us a second here. Because why that becomes a problem is, if I just jump back here, I can't actually see the place names that I was after on the other one, is VUldehar here. The Russians are sitting beneath VUldehar, but if we find that Uspanivka falls, it's a crossroad. And so once it falls, this main supply road, which runs down here, runs in from the northwest, runs in from the southwest, all of these points of accessing Uspanivka and then supplying down this main road line to VUldehar become cut. And so that becomes a problem for the Ukrainian forces. As if we zoom out, we can see that quite rapidly this salient around Novomikailivka could be taken. This salient, if VUldehar is then cut off, this area begins to fall, and you see how this whole section here of the line starts to advance westwards or northwestwards. There's activity, of course, around this area here, which is the Vremevka ledge. This is an area in green here where the Ukrainians captured territory in the offensive last year, moving down from Velika Novosilica to take Naskuchne and Bladotne, Makarivka, Staromaorske, and to get down to Urozhaina. Now there are reports that the Russian forces are starting to push back up the Vremevka ledge, and similar undoing of the Ukrainian advance during the offensive of last year in the Orikhiv sector, which is where the fighting is around Robotino and verbove. We can see, even on this pro-Ukrainian map, we can see the recent advance and the push up here. There are some reports around here that the Russians are finding some areas of weak resistance from the Ukrainians in some pockets, that they are falling back easier than expected. There is obviously still 5-10 kilometers to go from the bottom of this salient to Novomikailivka and another 10 to Orikhiv. But if the Russians are able to flatten this across and take Robotino, then you have fields and gaps and the ability to push rapidly back to Novomikailivka and then to Lastochkino or Orikhiv. There are also reports of Russian forces making advances here on the very far western side of the Nonokharkovka reservoir area around Kamianska. Now, this reservoir is no longer full of water. It has dried out over the summer. It just has a river flowing through it now, the Dnieper River flowing through, so it is much easier to get across. As I've mentioned a couple of times, I think that we will start to see the Russian forces pushing up from Kamiansk, getting to the outskirts of Zaporozhia, and then perhaps looking to move up and east and skirt Zaporozhia, not take Zaporozhia, but skirt it and cut these major supply lines and effectively contain Zaporozhia for a period of time. Then perhaps look to ways, given that this is no longer a big waterway, to find safe places to get across the Dnieper River. Perhaps here at Nikopol, where there's been reports of Russian bombing in this area, which is just across from the Zaporozhia nuclear power plant. Perhaps further down here, where the bridge for the Nonokharkovka dam, the dam wall, was destroyed, doing some repairs on that and making another access point, or identifying along this riverway where the river is now thinner, areas that they can get across, even perhaps moving right down into this area and looking for points like the Antonovsky Bridge, which is partially destroyed, or finding some other area down here to the south of Kherson, but allowing the Russians to build forces across the southern, from Zaporozhia down southern Dnieper River, to allow them to be able to work forces this way and wrap around Mykolaiv, cut Mykolaiv off and cut this main supply road here to Odessa, before then moving down to Odessa. Now, when the Russians move on Odessa, there's quite likely to be, I would suggest, some sort of naval presence as well. Some of the Black Fleet will be moving out cautiously, I would suggest, given the success the Ukrainians have had with their sea drones, but nevertheless, some of the missile capability of the Russian Black Fleet, I imagine, would be utilised in taking Odessa. Now, once the Russians do take Odessa and Mykolaiv, all of this area here comes under Russian control, then the threat of sea drones is gone. The Russian Black Sea Fleet then will have some breathing space and time to reflect upon what they've learnt in this experiment that the Ukrainians have conducted on them with drone technology. Really, I guess it's not surprising that the Black Sea Fleet has suffered the way that it has. It is the only navy currently engaged in a conflict with a sea involved like this, where they are experiencing drones. In much the same way that we've seen FPV drones be the game changer in terms of land-based operations, land sets and that sort of thing. The sea is no different, and the example and experiment has been carried out on the Russians. navies all around the planet will be looking at that and scratching their heads about what is the risk ratio look like now for launching a large, expensive ship into a conflict. How do you protect that ship from small, submersible, semi-submersible drones that cost bugger all to produce and could be sent at you en masse? When you start to think that missiles sometimes cost millions of dollars each, these small sea drones could be in the range of tens of thousands of dollars to produce. So if you were to send out 10 or 50 or 100 of them at a major target, you only need 1 or 2 of them to get through and contact the ship, and you can have the result that we saw just last week, the Russian Caesar having been having been sunk. So challenges there. As I say, I think the Russians will have on their mind getting Odessa and taking it from the land so that they neutralise any threat of sea drones going forward. That's a little bit of an update there in terms of sea-based operation. Of course, the UK having another embarrassing moment for the UK Navy. The Vanguard, HMS Vanguard submarine had the British Defence Secretary Grant Shapps apparently on board to watch them launch a Trident missile, and it failed. It reportedly flew in the air, did a few loops, and its self-auto-destruct would have kicked in, and it just landed in the sea close to the submarine. It did not complete a successful test. This is not the first failed test that the Tridents have had. There have been previous ones that the UK Navy have suffered under. It's interesting, his response after this. What should have been a missile firing into the sky and heading towards its intended target. It didn't have a weapon on it. It wasn't fired in anger. It was a test. But should have no doubt landed on its target successfully and been able to be portrayed as a big show of strength by the British submarine fleet and navy. It was the opposite of that, yet Grant Shapps, this is his statement afterwards, I'll just read it. The test reaffirmed the effectiveness of the UK's nuclear deterrent, in which the government has absolute confidence. The submarine and crew were successfully certified and will rejoin the operational cycle as planned. On this occasion, an anomaly did occur, but it was event-specific and there are no implications for the reliability of the wider Trident missile systems and stockpiles, nor are there any implications for our ability to fire our nuclear weapons should the circumstances arise in which we need to do so. I don't know, I'm not particularly convinced by that. This comes 2 weeks after the British aircraft, the Queen Elizabeth, was unable to set sail for the big NATO Steadfast Defender operations up in the Baltic Sea. She was meant to attend as the lead British craft in those exercises, but apparently a propeller shaft issue had stopped her. So then her sister ship, the Prince of Wales aircraft carrier, was called out and it was unable to launch on time. Now, it delayed its launch only by a day and then was able to take off and is now leading the British contingent in the Steadfast Defender operations. But still, these type of things are embarrassing for the UK Navy, who once ruled the oceans years ago, appears to no longer be in that position. There are stories that come up all the time in the UK about troubles with launching their ships because of numbers, just resourcing numbers, not having adequately trained and prepared naval staff. Obviously, mechanical issues with the Queen Elizabeth. There's something going wrong with the drive shaft, and undisclosed reason which stopped the Prince of Wales from leaving on its planned date. Now, that's not as embarrassing as it sounds. These are big ships. They have windows for launch in which they will go out within a period of time, because it does take time to get things ready on such a large craft. However, if a date is given and suggested that they're leaving on the Sunday at lunchtime, they would like to be able to leave on the Sunday at lunchtime so as not to have to suffer this embarrassment. Another interesting point, just stepping away really from the war, but obviously a lot of what we see in this conflict is being conducted on social media. If you're on X or Telegram, you're able to get to-the-moment updates 24/7 about what is going on. On other topics, of course, there are conflicts going on in other areas. There's a conflict with Hamas and Israelis occurring in Gaza. Now, there have been a large number of, you would call, Palestinian supporting accounts that appear to have been shut down. So Elon Musk was speaking on this, and he has said something which I tend to agree with here. He has said, look, wherever we're operating, wherever we have offices and we're licensed, whatever countries it might be, we have to adhere to the laws of those countries. And if we don't, then we run the risk of being shut down or employees being arrested. So I can imagine that in somewhere like the United States, where the Israel lobby is known to be extremely strong and extremely influential, and they've worked for years to attain that position, that the laws in America about what is said about Israel, regardless of what you might think about those laws, whether they are even or balanced, the reality of the situation is that those laws exist. And if they do exist, then Twitter or X is held to them, or as Elon has said, they run the risk of being shut down in an area. And if, for example, they breached those laws in the United States and then lost a court case and Twitter had to shut down in the United States, that would, of course, be financial ruin for X and for Twitter and for all of the people who use that service, the inability to use that service. So while I have my own opinions on the imbalance in the way that censorship is carried out on the X platform, certainly I would say it has improved since Elon Musk has taken over. Prior to that, if you were what you would traditionally call a postmodern or left-wing account, you had fairly free reign. That has been rolled back a little, and what you are seeing in terms of the right being able to speak has now been freed up. There are still areas, of course, where you don't have full freedom of speech, but in the real world, there are reasons for that. Now, perhaps with time and with groundswell, force from people speaking to their politicians, those rules may be changed, but right now they're not. So I think that gives some insight as to why some of that imbalance is occurring on a platform like X. Okay, just last one, because I don't have a great deal of time today. I need to wind this up quickly. Lloyd Austin. I know I keep going on about this, and some of you probably think it's mad, but there's one day we will find out more about this story. So a week or so ago, he was back into critical care, and then he was released after 2 days. Now, we haven't seen a great deal since then. I've seen 2 videos of him since he resurfaced. Someone suggested, a commenter on this YouTube channel suggested that perhaps Lloyd Austin, I don't know, I have no way of knowing this is true all, and it may be completely wild speculation, but they've suggested that, and it's intriguing to think about, that Lloyd Austin is already dead and that he died some time ago, and that the 2 short videos that we have seen of him are AI-generated deepfakes. And if you'd said this to me a year ago, I would have said it's ridiculous. There's possibility of that is 0. But I've said myself to people, to friends, that I've reached the point now with AI-generated video that I can't tell anymore. I can't say that's definitely fake, that's AI, or that's definitely real. So when I thought about this, because it is an intriguing topic, given some of the backstory, the story that perhaps he had been on one of his undisclosed trips to Ukraine and was wounded via a Russian missile strike onto a NATO command centre, that, it's plausible, I guess. I think if I think about it, it's possible. It's certainly possible that the videos we've seen are AI deepfakes. That much is possible. Now, if that is possible, that doesn't, of course, then correlate with the fact that he is dead. He may have just been too sick to be able to actually front for a video, so they made videos. That's possible. And again, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just thinking this through. So it's possible that the videos are deepfakes. Now, if they were deepfakes, then you do begin to question, well, why? Why were they needed? And that's where you can move into the area of speculation about him not being well enough or him not, or perhaps even being dead. Of course, I am not connected into the US military apparatus, so I don't have the ability to just squash this quite straight away by saying, well, actually, I went and had a beer with him last week, and yeah, he's a bit sick, but he's fine. So who knows? But if what is happening is cancer-related, prostate cancer-related, and for some reason it's far more advanced than we had heard about and spreading, that's what is going on, then this brings up another set of questions which seem to require some thought. I would have expected that someone as high up in the chain of command of a country's military in the Pentagon, like Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, that he would undergo regular medical screening and checkups for things just like that. A 70-year-old man, very aware that prostate cancer is something that can creep up on you. I would have suggested that he would be undertaking quarterly checkups, health, fitness, bit of a scan on the heart, give some blood, check for all of those cancer markers, and that it would be unlikely that he would have encountered aggressive, unknown cancer development. Now, it's possible, again, I'm not a doctor or a cancer surgeon, I have no idea, but I would have thought that he would be one of the few people, unlike myself and regular Joe on the street, who probably goes to the doctor when they feel sick or something's really sore, but doesn't necessarily go in every 6 months or every year for a full checkup. I would imagine that it would be part of his job description that he would need to do that as part of the security of the nation and business continuity of his role, to ensure that, hey, if you do start getting sick with cancer, we find out really quickly and we can deal with it quickly. Could be that is what happened. They actually detected it and they dealt with it. But then it's unusual, it seems, the extent of his ongoing concerns. Again, this man spent a lot of time in critical care and hospital. He was admitted back to critical care last week, not just for a quick checkup and everything's okay, or here's some Panadol, you're a bit sore, but back into critical care ward was the reporting. So something serious is going on with Lloyd Austin's health. Whatever the cause of it is, it seems unusual. And at some stage, I hope we do find out more about it. All right. Hey, that's it for me today. I look forward to talking to you again soon. I'm hoping I'm putting another show either tonight or tomorrow for you. I hope you're having a great week. Yeah, talk soon. Hello, Renee Lee.